is Cindy White, and this is Heart to Heart Live. And I'm just really excited that you are here today, Lynn, and very much looking forward to having a discussion with you. If you have any comments or questions, don't hesitate to put those in the chat. Today we're going to be talking about how to live by faith. And many times people don't realize what faith is. And so my question just out there is, what is faith? We know that we know what faith is when it comes to God. We put our trust in God, who's unseen, but yet we see him in everything around us, including the hope for our eternal life as we trust in Jesus. We see him in the beautiful surroundings. I live in the Pacific Northwest, and the trees and the mountains and the hills and everything around us are just beautiful, and there has to be a creator. But not seeing our creator, not seeing how he created everything, I have to put my trust and my faith in God that he created all these things for us. And so that is what one of the things that faith is and how we can kind of describe faith. Then there's a question, how do we live by faith? Hebrews 11, verse 1, starting in verse 1, says, "Now faith is confidence in what we hope for and assurance of what we do not see." And again, it's evidence that is not seen. That's really what faith is, having that confidence in what we don't see. It's called faith. And then verse 3, in Hebrews 11, it says, "By faith we understand that the universe was formed at God's command, so that what is visible was made out of what is not seen." And so again, at God's command, he spoke the word, and there was nothing there, and the universe was formed, and that's all faith in the unseen. And so what is visible is a result out of what is unseen, and that is what faith is. Verse 7 in Hebrews 11 says, "By faith Noah, when he was warned about things not yet seen, in holy fear, he built an ark to save his family." And so I'm hoping you get it. You're getting the theme here about what faith is. God spoke, and the world was created. And he also spoke to Noah. He gave him a warning. And he said there's going to be a flood, and there was going to be rain, and the whole earth was going to be washed away. And there had never been rain. So Noah and all the people that lived during that time had never seen rain. And so here Noah was told to build an ark, and it was going to save mankind and the animals. And of course, we know the story, 2 by 2 and everything else. And here we are today, along with our dogs and cats and pets and all the other animals here. So by faith, Noah was warned by God. God spoke the word to Noah. In holy fear, he built an ark. Noah built an ark where he had never seen rain. That's what living by faith is. And he did it to save his family. And so even in spite of the fact that Noah was doing what God had warned him about and told him to do, think of everybody else living at that time, the ridicule, the persecution that he got, all the kinds of things that the people were saying about Noah, how ridiculous he was, how, it's nothing's like this has ever happened before. We don't even know what rain is. What is rain anyway? They couldn't even comprehend what Noah was doing and what God was saying. But Noah had a trust in God. And that trust and that relationship with God kept him moving forward, just as God speaks to us. When we have a relationship with God and God speaks, we know he is trustworthy, we know he is faithful, and we can put our trust and our faith in God. And that is one way we live by faith. And then going down again in Hebrews 11 to verse 8, by faith Abraham, when called to go to a place he would later receive as his inheritance, obeyed and went, even though he did not know where he was going. So again, God spoke to him, he called him, to a place. He gave him a promise of an inheritance. And Abraham stepped out in faith, obeying, and he went. And verse 9 says, by faith, he made his home in a promised land, like a stranger in a foreign country. He lived in tents, as it did Isaac and Jacob, who were heirs with him of that same promise. And there was Sarah. Sarah was past childbearing years. Sarah was Abraham's wife. By faith, even Sarah was enabled to bear children because she considered him faithful who had made the promise. Sarah again had this relationship with a God that she trusted as faithful. And so she considered him faithful who had made the promise to her husband and her. And so from this one man, Abraham, and his wife, Sarah, who both were as good as dead, they were older, there came descendants as numerous as the stars in the sky and as countless as the sand on the seashore. That was fulfilling the promise that God had given them. So what does faith look like, and how do we live by faith? First of all, Noah and Abraham and Sarah had a faith in God. They trusted God. They had a relationship with God. God spoke to them, and they responded out of obedience to that. And so as we trust in God, and he speaks to us, and he tells us to do something or ask something of us, then we, in faith, believe that what he said will be fulfilled as we step out in faith. And so what does faith look like in our personal and professional lives? We take steps of faith, sometimes leaps, when we feel the Lord is leading us in a certain direction. When we get married, my son just got married, so that was definitely a step of faith and so fun. Start a business, we change directions. We might be going in one direction and we feel like God is speaking to us about changing directions. It's all a faith in the unknown. We don't know what the future holds, but somehow we feel the Lord's leading as we change directions. Or even invest in our business or ourselves. It all requires faith in the unknown. Fear enters in that moment. Now, I can imagine going back to Noah, with all the people responding the way they did to him, there probably was a little bit of fear. But if you remember, as I read the word earlier, it said he had a holy fear of God. And we have a holy fear and reverence for God, then the fear of man is really non-existent, because we honor the Lord and have that holy fear of God. And so how do we deal with fear that can defeat or even cripple us? Sarah trusted in God, who is faithful. That's what we can do. We can trust in a faithful God. We can act on God's promise or his word, on what he says, not what man says. So Noah built an ark, one board at a time, to build that ark that ended up being this gigantic ship that saved mankind and the animals. Abraham obeyed God and went and lived among foreigners in the promised land. So Noah built an ark, one board at a time. Abraham obeyed God, and he went and lived among people that were foreigners in a promised land that was given to him, the promise by God. So they acted out their faith in obedience because they trusted in God. Fear destroys the triumph or victory that is waiting for us to discover. Have you allowed fear in your life that has destroyed what maybe God has said, or what the victory that could have been? Many of us have experienced that kind of fear that is that just freezes us into not being able to move forward in the things that God has given to us. But we can be overcomers and not only conquer fear, but anticipate what faith can be in every area of our life. Faith can be exciting. We can live by faith, not by sight, and be victorious. Think about some things maybe in your life that you have stepped out in faith, and all of a sudden there's this amazing victory to be had. And you think of, if I had never done that, ever have experienced this certain step of faith that I've had. We all have them. And faith can actually be the most exciting life to live, because God has so much more for us than we could have ever planned in our own strength, in our own ability. James 2:26 says, faith without works is dead. So Noah built an ark. That was the works of faith. And then Matthew 17:20 says, faith moves mountains. Okay, faith moves mountains. Mountain is pretty incredible. And I don't know if there are any mountain climbers out there. I have a son, his name is Jeremy, that has climbed Mount Rainier. And he told me that, climbing the mountain is really hard. It's one step at a time. But when he got to the top, he looked at the top and saw the view. And he actually said it was like having church. He was in God's amazing creation. And he realized the pain and the suffering and the perseverance and everything that he went through to climb hill after hill, to go across the valleys of that mountain climb. He had a guide, he had a team, he had equipment, he had what he needed to get to the top. But once he got there, there was nothing that he could have prepared for that moment. It was more than he could have asked or imagined. It was breathtaking, beautiful. And that's what God can do as we climb our mountains of faith that we have. Whatever is set before us, faith can move that mountain. We can be overcomers. And on the other side of that mountain, we can do amazing things for God, and God can do amazing things through us. Matthew 17:20 says, if you have faith as small as a mustard seed, you can say to this mountain, move from here to there, and it will move. Nothing will be impossible for you. And that's not a measure of faith. That is a faith in God. If you have faith in God, those mountains can move, because God is a God of impossibilities. And so again, it's trusting in the faithfulness of God that can do what we can't possibly do, to move the mountains, to face the fears, whatever the obstacles are. Okay, when we are facing gigantic mountains, our faith in God helps us to look past the mountain, no matter how big they seem. In 2 Corinthians 5, verse 7, it says, for we walk by faith, not by sight. So I hope that this is really being absorbed in your heart and your mind today, that the faithful walk that we live, as we live by faith and not by sight, we are in for an amazing adventure. As Jeremy climbed Mount Rainier, he was walking by faith every step of the way. There were so many things that could come in front of him that would prevent him from getting to the top, that could prevent him from getting to the top and being that overcomer. But he faithfully did what he knew to do and put one step in front of another. He faithfully walked, not seeing the top, because when you're walking up the mountain, you can't see the top. You can only see it when you're there, right? But once you get there, that walk of faith has been worth every single step. So as you climb a mountain, there are valleys and foothills, rocks, there were wild animals, weather of all kinds, rain and snow, ice, wind, the sun. Okay, all these obstacles that could be in the way, what are they for you? Sometimes we need help, just like Jeremy needed a guide to go up the mountain. He needed the right kind of equipment. Sometimes we need equipment of our Word of God, our fellowship with other believers, encouragement, Bible studies, these kind of live events to encourage us. We need food for our soul. We need whatever God allows us to grow in our faith as we take those steps of faith. We are not alone, and we can't expect ourselves to be alone as we take those steps of faith. Jesus is always with us, walking beside us every single step of the way. So faith in Jesus and trusting God's will for our lives is how we overcome the fear and the obstacles that are in the way. Trusting that when God says what he says to us, what he gives us as a promise, how he guides and directs us every single step of the way, knowing that when God speaks a word, he is faithful to fulfill that word in our lives. But we need to walk in obedience to what God has asked us to do. And then Proverbs 16:9 says, in their hearts, humans plan their course, but the Lord establishes their steps. We cannot do this walk of faith without God. People try, many people fail, but we can't do this without the Lord encouraging us, being with us. So I have some questions for you today. And the first question is, have you put your faith in God?
I have. Does it waver? Yes, it does.
Oh.
You know, I mean, this is a fallen, broken world.
Mm-hmm.
I'm a broken, sinful person.
Mm-hmm.
But, you know, each day that you just keep getting up and trying, I mean, to me, that's, you know, taking those first steps in faith. Each morning you wake up and say, okay, I'm going to try. You know, I'm going to talk to the Lord. I'm going to spend time with the Lord. I'm going to try to renew my heart and my spirit. And it's just a continuing process because we know the work will not be finished until we go to be with the Lord. So
Right.
we have to keep trying. And I don't know how people without faith do that. I really don't. If
I
I had
would agree
to,
with you, Lynn. I would totally agree with you. We have had some pretty tremendous trials and mountains. Our son, Jeremy, who I shared about, the mountain climber, he also went through an amazing trial. He said it was the hardest mountain to climb, and that at 31 years old, he was diagnosed with end-stage heart failure.
oh no.
And as a mountain climber, he was fit as can be. He had everything going for him. He trusted in God, but the obstacle of his heart failure, if we hadn't put our faith in God, I don't know if our family would have survived. Today, Jeremy has a heart transplant, and he's the one that I said just got married in June.
Mm-hmm.
He is doing great. But it was the faithfulness of God, the prayers of so many people that kept us through that allowed us to stand strong and know that God was with us. He was walking this walk of faith because there was so much unseen about this walk that we didn't know what the outcome was going to be. But had we not put our faith in God, I don't know what would have happened today. And honestly, there were so many times that Jeremy could have died. It was critical every step of the way, and yet God performed miracles every step of the way as we just trusted in him because we know he's a faithful God. And so the next question, and honestly, you don't need to answer these out loud, is just really something that you can either write down or just think about. What promise has God made to you that you are still waiting to be fulfilled? Because many of us have had things that God has spoken to us, promises. You know, Abraham had been given a promise, and here he was, an old man, and he had been given the promise many years earlier. How long did it take for Noah to build that ark? A long time. Way back when, one board at a time, right? And sometimes we've been waiting for those promises to be fulfilled. You know, God has still given me promises that I'm still waiting for. And you hold on to those promises. And when God speaks that word, he is faithful and true. He will fulfill what he has spoken. And so you hold on to that. And that's another reason to put our faith in God, because he is faithful. And then what steps can you take as you wait? Actually, this is one of the steps that I am taking as I'm waiting. I'm waiting for things with the doors that God has opened up in my life, ministry and business. And I can do these heart-to-heart lives, and God has opened up this door to reach out to people. And so this is a step that I can take as I'm waiting for the promise to be fulfilled. You know, so some of those steps are right in front of you. Many times we don't know if we should take them or not because of the unseen, because of the fear, because of the doubt, because of the obstacles. But we need to take those steps. And then what can you imagine will happen as God uses those steps of faith in your life and for other people? You know, as Noah took the steps of faith and built that ark, he really could not even comprehend that we're talking about him today, that he saved mankind, that he saved the animals. You know, he could not have imagined who the ark was really for. He just thought it was to save his own family. You know, so there's many reasons why we need to take the steps of faith, many people that are those reasons why we need to take those. So imagine what God can do as you take your steps of faith. And sometimes the steps feel like a giant leap. And I've taken those giant leaps too. They've been scary. And then I realize that, you know, God is going to catch me if I fall. That's just who God is. And so even if we falter, God is there to pick us up. You know, Peter took the step of faith as he walked on water. And when he began to sink, Jesus was right there to pick him up. So what do we have to be afraid of? Not anything. What obstacles are in the way of your mountain that is before you to climb? You know, obstacles, like I said earlier, but they can be the fear of the unknown. If that is the case, just take that step and climb that mountain. Trust in God that he's going to be there. And then when you get to the mountain top, you will be an overcomer because God has set the way in place. He has prepared the way for you to become an overcomer in that certain area, whether it's your personal life or your business, whatever professional life, whatever it is in front of you. God has already prepared the way. God was preparing the way for us as Noah built that ark. God was preparing the way for Abraham. As Abraham obeyed, he was preparing the way for us as Abraham obeyed and went. You know, he prepares a way for us. Another obstacle is a fear of failure. Many of us fear failure. And yet, just like Peter, when he faltered, Jesus was there to pick him up. God is on your side. Sometimes he holds your hand. He rescues you. He is a rescuer and a deliverer. And sometimes he holds you and picks you up and carries you. He is always beside you, no matter what happens. So we don't need to be afraid of failure. Some people are afraid of success, believe it or not. There is a real fear of success. Maybe we don't feel like we've ever been successful, and yet God wants to bless us. So we need to let him. And in spite of ourselves, God is such a gracious and merciful God that he wants to bless his people, however that looks, whatever that means. So we don't need to and be afraid of success. And then there's a fear of others, fear of people, fear of man, right? Again, think of Noah. Noah had a lot of people he could have been afraid of, but he had a holy, awesome, reverence fear of God that displayed all the fears of man. And that's the kind of relationship we need to have with God, especially when we fear people. What God says has to be more important than what man says. Even when we're ridiculed, when we're persecuted by words, when we feel stabbed in the back by people, gossiped about by people, whatever it is, maybe we've been stepped over because people in the business world have climbed over us. You know, there's all kinds of reasons that people want to put us down especially when we're believing God for something. And it's because the enemy is very real and he uses good, well-meaning people to get us down, and recognize that we are in a spiritual battle, but God is the one that is conquering this battle for us, and he wins. And we are on his side, so we don't need to fear people. So where are the people now that were ridiculing Noah? Think about that one. Here we are, and they're not. So imagine you have climbed that mountain. You have taken those steps of faith, those giant leaps of faith. You have walked on the hard terrain and the elements of the weather and all of the obstacles you faced, even the fear of the wild animals, as you have. Sometimes we feel like people are those wild animals at times. They're ferocious. They want to devour us. But you face them all. You've conquered all of your fears. You are at the top of the mountain, and you are taking in the most breathtaking, beautiful sight you've ever seen. Imagine you are that person standing on the mountain of your life. What do you see? What can you imagine? Ephesians 3:20 says, "To him who is able to do abundantly more than all we could ask or imagine, according to his power that is at work within us." So what you can imagine in that, being a conqueror of that mountain, the breathtaking, beautiful scene at the top of the mountain. God has more than you could ask or imagine. But if you hadn't taken those steps of faith to climb that mountain, you would never know what God has for you. And so today I want to encourage you to go for it, whatever is in front of you, whatever God has spoken to you and he's asking you to walk this way, to do this, to climb this mountain, to change this direction. Whatever promise he's given you that you're waiting for, while you're waiting, just take the steps of faith. Trust in Jesus to be with you, to walk beside you. He won't let you fall. God has got something more than you could ask or imagine, just waiting to be had. So I hope this encourages you today. Thank you so much for Carol and Jeanette joining as well. And if you have any questions, I would be more than happy to answer questions for you as we talk about this. This journey of faith is sometimes easy and it's sometimes very difficult, as my own journey has been with my son and our family. And that's one of many obstacles that we've faced as we have walked this journey and climbed this mountain together. So if you have any questions or comments, you can put them in the chat. I would love to just hear what you have to say. Yes, Carol, thank you so much for that. And if you would like to come and listen again, I'm doing these once a month. the beginning of each month on Wednesday at 10 o'clock. And I would love to have you join me for the next one. Anyway, well, God bless you all. And thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you, Cindy.
You're very welcome.
Thank you, Cindy. God bless you.
You're welcome.